We won't quiz you any more than we do anyone else if you sit close to the speakers. But thank you all for coming tonight. Please find a good seat, and we're very glad that you were joining us tonight. My name is Paul Teske. I'm the Dean of the School of Public Affairs here at the University of Colorado, Denver. And this is the second More From Our Schools event. How many people were at the first one? Raise your hands. Okay. And a few. And there will be a third event in November 15th, here at the same place and same time on that evening. But the More From Our Schools series was started by Tony Lewis and Donald Kay and sponsored by a few other groups, including my own School of Public Affairs. And the idea is to bring people together to have civil conversations about issues related to Denver public schools. And as you all know, this is an election season. We have a fairly important, fairly contentious election with different candidates offering different positions for each of the three seats that are up, the 2 district seats and 1 at-large seat. And I think there's a lot of talk about that, about the candidates, about the politics and the issues, and that's very important. I think it's actually a very good sign for Denver that we have good candidates seeking to serve for free in a very difficult position on the school board. But at the same time, the important issues for kids and teachers and principals in our schools go on every day, and regardless of kind of how the election turns out next month, the kids need to be educated, and we need to do a better job with that than we have done historically. And so the More From Our Schools event is an attempt to bring people together to have these conversations, and in some cases bring in outside experts to kind of validate or test where Denver is and how Denver compares to other places, and what, as we'll be talking about tonight, what some of our strategies are and how well they've been working and how they might be changed or tweaked or changed radically to be improved. So I see a lot of friendly faces in the audience. We've got a lot of VIPs here as well, but we don't want to take too much time with introductions. I'll just say thank you all for coming. The first More From Our Schools event, which was last month, was hosted by, or moderated by Rick Hess, and Van Scholes of A+ Denver presented some trend data and some test score and market share and achievement data for DPS, and there's been some good trends actually in the last 5 years, which is heartening, but also the levels of achievement and proficiency and graduation are of course nothing near what we'd like to see for our schools, and unfortunately that's true in a lot of big urban districts, but certainly also true in Denver. So the hope is that these conversations can move the district forward, can move the different groups, the nonprofits and citizen groups that are out there working hard on these issues forward, and bring some of our ideas together. A couple of logistics for tonight. You see on your seat hopefully a keypad voting device. It's not a cell phone. And don't take it home tonight, but Chris Adams will be helping us do some keypad voting on what you want to talk about tonight, and in particular what you want to ask these experts about Denver Public Schools. And it's pretty easy to operate. You basically push the button for the thing you want to vote for when we get to that point in the event tonight. And if you don't have one, or if yours doesn't work, or you want to vote twice and grab one from another seat, you could probably do that as well, although you probably can't do that in the public schools election coming up. We have 3 very distinguished panelists and a very distinguished moderator with us tonight, and I want to get to them as quickly as possible. John Merrow, our moderator, will introduce the panelists and ask them questions, as well as the questions you're asking them. Many of you probably know John. He's come to us today from New York. He's been involved for a long time with National Public Radio and PBS, in particular as the education correspondent for the NewsHour on PBS. I have a whole page here of honors and awards that he's won, Peabody Awards, Emmy nominations, all kinds of things, a couple of books, lots of articles on education policy. His own education is very distinguished and punctuated by a PhD from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So with no further ado, I will hand the mic over to John Merrow, our moderator. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you all. This is a treat. I just want to say that I travel around the country, and around the country everybody's talking about Denver. things are really happening in Denver. And what's fascinating is you come to Denver and you find that Denver's worried. They're trying to make it, they're nervous. Are we doing it right? And maybe that's why everybody's talking about you, because you take it seriously, because you have a real commitment to try to understand the issues. And so forums like this are just another piece of the evidence. We do have three distinguished, actually I was thinking three words. Distinguished is, actually two of them are distinguished professors. You're not, as far as I know, but we're going to, you have been though. Yeah, that's Paul Hill, Howard Fuller, Lorrie, Shepard, that they all three are learners, which I think is what separates them from an awful lot of folks that you can, and all three are thoughtful. There are bios in there, and I agree with Paul, we shouldn't take a lot of time talking about how wonderful they are. We'll make them prove it. But first, we have a tutorial on how to use the clicker in front of you. Chris Adams is our teacher.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to take about a minute to go through how to use these things. Paul sort of gave you a tutorial, but without visual aids and without experiential learning opportunities. So it's very simple. We'll have a series of multiple choice questions. They'll be numbered, and you just push the number that corresponds to your answer choice. You just push it here. You'll get a confirmation on the little LCD display, and you get a check mark that tells you that it's been received by the laptop over there. And as long as the green box up here in the right-hand corner is green, you can change your answer as many times as you want, and I will, or John will do a quick countdown, or I will, or something. You'll know when the vote is closing, and just the last answer that you choose will be the answer that's registered, and then very shortly there'll be a bar graph that shows up that tells what everybody said. So let's do a quick practice question. Oh, and if you're having trouble with it, most likely, if you just don't touch it for about 5 or 10 seconds, it'll go blank. Try again, and it should work perfectly. If for some reason it doesn't, raise your hand, and I'll come and help you, or you can just grab another keypad off an empty chair. Okay, so the test question is, which crowd did you run with in high school? So press 1 if it was jocks, 2 hippies, 3 geeks, 4 band, 5 I didn't run with a crowd, I was just cool. I don't like fawns. You don't need to turn it on. You just push the numbered button that corresponds with your answer choice. So just push 1 through 5. Does anybody think they're having trouble? And I've used this joke before, and some of you have heard it, but I think it still applies. The ability to use these is often inversely related to your educational attainment. So this could be a challenging group. But it looks like most of the answers are in. You can see that there are about 60 or so, 59. So I will close this in 3, 2, and 1. And 59% of you were so cool that you didn't run with the crowd, you were the fawns.
So now we know how it works, but we're not going to discuss that. What we're going to do, we're going to talk about the goals the Denver Public School System has established. We're going to ask you to select 2 of these goals, strategies that you would like to talk about tonight. These are the goals. I hate folks who put something up on a screen and then read it, but I'm going to do it. These are the goals set by the Denver School Board, known as the Denver Plan. All students will graduate prepared for college or the workforce. All students will demonstrate at least 1 year's growth and meet or exceed state standards. The number of high-performing schools will increase. All students will have access to full-day kindergarten, and enrollment will continue to increase in the Denver Public Schools. Now those are lofty, lofty goals. And so here is your first polling question. Knowing the goals set by the school board, in your view, how likely is it that DPS will achieve these goals in the next 5 years? So you just make your choice, absolutely, likely, unlikely, not a chance, or you can waffle if you like. And is anyone having trouble with the voting? We need help from Chris. If you want to change your vote, just press the button, the choice you prefer to go to. And let's close the polls in 5, 4, 3, 2. Polls are closed. And they say 56% say it's unlikely. 25% say not a chance. Good heavens. Does that add up to 81%? Will Maybe we'll change your minds, maybe not. But then, so now we know how you feel. We know how you feel. Let's go to the strategies, because here's where you have to choose what you'd like folks, these three folks, to talk about, what you want to talk to them about. So here are the five verbatim. Focus on the instructional core. Great people drive better outcomes for students. Deepening engagement with families in the community. Strategic management of financial resources. And 5, a culture of service, high expectations, empowerment, and responsibility. Now, we agreed that we would translate those into English. So just to make it a little easier to understand, here's what you have to do. Here's where you have to choose 2. But let me read the new, slightly user-friendly language. Strategy 1, focus on school performance. Close poor-performing schools. Open new ones. Might be charter schools, might be innovation schools. Number 2, great teachers and principals mean that students do better in school. So focus on leadership. Number 3, that hasn't really changed. It means it deepen engagement with families and the community. Number 4, strategic budget management and resource distribution. That really means who controls the money. Just by way of, in a typical school, the school principal has very little control over his or her budget. 3, 4, 5, 10% maybe. In a charter school, the principal might have control of 90% of the budget. In innovation school, I gather it's more like 50%. But that's and then the 5th one is other. But the strategies are interesting. Increase dual enrollment, advanced placement, and international baccalaureate programs. Increase flexibility, stronger accountability, robust, transparent data systems, high-quality service at the district level. So what you're asked to do here is choose 2 that you'd like us to spend the evening talking about. Is anybody having trouble with clickers? So pick the 2, and then you're sure those are the 2 you want. Then hit that enter button, which is in the, as Chris said, in the upper left-hand column. So can we see how folks? Okay, we've got some slow voters here. Some of you PhDs. We're doing, are we, how far are we? I can't, we're at 59. The polls are going to close 5, 4, 3, 2. Polls are closed. So, you chose, focus on school, you chose first, great teachers and principals mean students do better in school. And then your second choice is focus on school performance. So, you have to vote one more time. But because when you're talking about, let's say we're going to focus on great teachers and principals mean students do better in school, there's some aspects of that. Can we just, I don't know if this is a vote or if we're just going to put these. Yes, slide 12. So, now, again, just so I know how to start with my panel, would you just pick the one that you think is the most important? New blood, teachers, principals, training the folks we have here, do a better job of evaluating money, performance pay, and other human capital needs. So just give me a kickoff question for my guys here. Pick one. We're doing pretty well on the vote. Okay, polls closing in 2, 1. Okay, so they want to talk about teacher, principal training, and support. All right, guys, what advice do you have for teacher, principal training and support? And one of the reasons we asked them to come here is that they know what's going on around the rest of the country. Who does a good job of working with the people they have in the house and empowering them or training them to do a better job? Oh.
Want me to start? I'll start. Rather than just say, well, go look at so-and-so, that district is doing it the best, I think since I can speak more about the Colorado context, I'll say that the most alarming thing for people trying to do this very complex work is how incoherent it is to try to respond to all of the mandates. And so the particular spin I would put on the kind of support that I would encourage is that it be orchestrated in such a way that people can get deep support that pulls together all of the things that need to be considered. So that includes the new frameworks you have for your LEAP framework that talks about classroom environment, talks about instructional strategies, talks about reflecting on your practice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But also, well, what should I do about that if I'm teaching 5th grade mathematics this hour and social studies another hour? And how should my mandates in literacy and second language, tending to second language learners relate to what I'm trying to do if I manage to get social studies into my instructional week at all? So there's so much going on. My advice to the district would be to have a way to provide that support that pulls together successful strategies across all of the mandates and directives.
Are you surprised? They're voting for what's usually called professional development, right? Isn't that almost like the poor cousin, something that almost never works? Paul, you wanted to jump in.
Well, I don't know where to start with that. But I was surprised. I think it's interesting. I'm going to be like in The Good Man, Charlie Brown. No matter what the question was, he's still told about Robin Hood. I'm going to talk about New York City, which it has a very distinctive approach to teacher and principal support and training. They don't assume the central office can possibly be as broad as the needs are, nor do they assume that in a district with thousands of, actually millions of children in that many schools, that the curricular needs or anything else of all the schools are going to be the same. And so what they're doing is trying to build a differentiated support structure where schools belong to networks that are focused on particular approaches to curriculum and instruction. So you have a network that focuses on Sizer-right progressive schools. You have one that may focus on more didactic schools. You may have a network that is for recovery of credits for kids that are way behind. And the assumption is that the teacher support and principal support and training needs of those different schools are different enough that they shouldn't all turn to the same vendor. And I think that one of the reasons I'm saying all this is that the fact that there are needs for training and support in Denver doesn't mean the central office is the best place to get it done.
So who decides? The school looks at itself and says...
So in New York City, the money goes out to schools on a per pupil basis kind of dramatically. They're trying to defund the central office to a degree as much as they can. Schools can choose. They have to choose one, but they can choose whichever one they want, and they pay fees to it. And if they don't like the services, they move. And then the district tells schools which of these support networks are actually helping their schools to improve and which ones are not.
Howard, how do you interpret this? I mean, does this strike you as a vote for the status quo? We just need to make the people who we have now better?
Not necessarily. I mean, because I took it as once you close the poor performance, because I went back to the first one, that people chose. So my notion of this was more, once you close poor performing schools or create new schools, you have to have a critical professional development element. But in terms of the particulars of the question, it's very hard for me to respond because most districts would never ask me to come and say anything. to them. so I don't have very good relationships with districts. So I'm much more aware of what is going on in networks like Uncommon Schools or KIPP or Aspire or Achievement First.
And how do they do it? How do they provide training for teachers and principals?
I think the ones that I've been involved in, they do an excellent job of providing ongoing training and development. But one of the things that they also do is that they clearly celebrate. If you go to like the KIPP Summit, for example, and you look at the way that they treat teachers and principals, and there is something to be said about this whole treat people like they're rock stars and all that, because there is an element of support that you have to provide for people who are doing this very, very difficult work day in and day out. And you've got to show both appreciation for what they're doing, and you've got to consistently give them new skills. And I've seen this operate in some of the networks that I've seen. I don't know very much about districts.
So the flip side, that support, you're saying that should really be recognition. It should not.
It's got to be both. I mean, if you read like Teach Like a Champion, and you look at those 49 lessons that have been learned, you know, in the sort of the new reform movement, and you really begin to talk about how could you possibly help people develop so that they can practice that day in and day out. What I'm trying to argue is, first of all, it is very, very difficult to do. And while you're doing it, you've also got to give people real deep support, or else it's not going to take.
Just one aspect of support I think of that is maybe unusual is to make sure that people's jobs are doable. One of the things about the principalship, for example, is that principals are if they obeyed all the summonses to the central office, they wouldn't be in their schools. Well, that is about the least supportive environment you can create to somebody who's supposed to be an instructional leader. And so it isn't just a matter of what training you give them, but it's also thinking really hard about what's the net effect of what the central office is doing to the schools on the capacity of these people to function even if they want to.
They may be trying to help, but they're actually getting in the way.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I suspect teachers in the audience know it from the point of view of the interruptions of their classes by the principals, who are doing to them what the central office does to them. But why does professional development have such a bad name? Or maybe you don't agree. Maybe you think it...
Because a lot of it over the years has been stupid. I mean, basically. I mean, no, I mean, what I'm saying is like, okay, so you're in a school, you got a small school, you find out that somebody's having some great professional, quote, in-service thing, you know, in Colorado Springs or something. So the only way that the people in the school know that somebody did it is because there's subs in the building or you got to take their class. So they go to this place and they learn all of this cool stuff. They come back, there's no time for them to work with their colleagues on anything that they've learned. And as all of you know, as a teacher, you get in the classroom, all that stuff that was cool up in the Springs, now you bring it back and you got to deal with your real kids. There's nobody there to give you support when you do it wrong. So once you do it wrong, what are you going to do if there's no support? You're going to go back to what you know, even though what you know didn't work. But at least you know it. So I'm just saying that historically what we've passed off as professional development is really not professional development at all. And one last thing, like this whole idea, for example, that you have teachers, they work all day, every day. And then what we say is, oh, okay, let's have professional development on Friday evening. That'd be a really good time to pull us all together to have, oh, well, maybe we'll do it on Saturday because y'all have no life and you don't have to do anything, so let's get together on Saturday. Or maybe we ought to do it just before we go back to school on Sunday. So what I'm saying is, the kind of stuff that we've done historically and called it a professional development is a joke. And that's why I think people consider it to be.
Because it is. Lorrie.
Well, and I will agree and say that there's a pretty deep research base that exemplifies Howard's point and goes on to say that one shot in service is worthless. So when you actually treat teachers as learners and ask yourself what it would actually take to learn to teach in a fundamentally different way. So let's say you want to have mathematics taught in a way where the level of questioning in the class and the kinds of ways that kids engage multiplication or engage geometry at whatever level is at a fundamentally higher level. And you don't want to wait till they've memorized everything and then do thinking. You want to do thinking from the start. But the teacher herself or himself was not taught that way. So they can't rely on some old habits. And there's a book full of this stuff, but it's pretty intimidating. So to learn how to teach in that fundamentally different way, you might have to relearn the mathematics yourself. You for sure have to have a sustained way of trying it out, saying and reporting back to your colleagues what worked and what didn't work.
You have to have a safe environment to try stuff and fail.
And the scope of time that it takes to do this and the kind of ongoing recourse to experts that you have to have over that sustained period. Now, they don't have to be at your elbow every minute, but you have to either have teams in your school or access to experts regularly. You have to, if you want them to learn to understand student reasoning, you have to have assessment tasks where they bring back to the convening and talk about the student work and the student reasoning and, well, how would you intervene if the student is stuck, etc. It's completely different from driving to Colorado Springs,
Well, now,
as Howard pointed out.
we're looking for advice for Denver. Who does this well, assuming you agree that it's this complicated approach to it? And then let's not just stay in the United States. Where is it done well? The teachers are supported so they can learn new ways to teach, and which.
So I'll give a partial answer and look for others, but one thing that Lorrie said is it's really done well in the context of the people's practice. This isn't something that you hire yourself off to a university for. It isn't something even necessarily you need a substitute for. And it certainly isn't something that is scheduled and then in advance and then people think up what to do at the time. It's problem solving. And what I see in charter networks and CMOs is a growing awareness that, first of all, teachers have to learn. There's a lot of, that school has to do a lot of problem solving, but that this is a collective activity that people in the school, they're allocating their own resources to it.
So collective activity, does that mean teachers get to watch each other teach, critique each other?
And they get to share, they get to get a common sense of what their problems are that need to be solved.
So is that a recommendation for Denver, that it should somehow enable within a school building, teachers would have the opportunity to watch each other, to share teaching ideas, to critique each other, to be what they call critical friends in one of the networks?
Yes, it's an overworked phrase to talk about communities of practice and collaborative teams. I think Howard pointed to the need for time, and then you need a collaborative structure. So it's not a day off to go to Colorado Springs. It's recurring time in the instructional day or instructional week when at least grade level teams can meet to work on some of these things. And so it is also effective when they just bring the same student work in a grade level to these meetings. They do need recourse to expertise if in the group there isn't someone who's already pretty adept at that fundamentally different way of, let's say, talking about higher order thinking in that.
But all that's available on the internet as well. I mean, can't technology be a part of good professional development? You could access the video of people talking. I mean, it
can be a resource. I don't mean to be too hostile, but I'd like to deliver a slightly hostile message about what it is that technology can and cannot solve. It can be a tremendous resource for learning about and for gaining wide access to a library of materials, but it cannot interact with you and help you reason through a given student's work and say, what would you do when a student is stuck here? Now, there are very few, and this, because assessment is my area, there are few instances where the assessments have been gathered and typical errors are actually available, as well as really good problems. So there are few things on the web, but let's not imagine that, oh, technology is going to step in and solve this.
But should teachers, you have them in the building figuring out what they need, but the technology enables you to at least get in touch with other teachers. I mean, isn't it possible to do some of this so you're reaching out to teachers, even teachers in Denver schools, but also maybe teachers in Palo Alto or Brooklyn, and saying, how do you deal with such and such a problem? Should that kind of institutional process of learning, should that become part of what Denver does?
I think so. I chair the board of a small high school, 160 kids, and it's the most humbling work that I've ever done. And the issue that we were dealing with today was the principal sent me an email that I saw right before I got on the plane. And she said she needs to set aside every Wednesday afternoon for professional development. Now, what's the tension? The tension is the kids need every single hour of instruction that we can possibly give them. But if we don't set aside every Wednesday afternoon, there's no way that I can see how we can improve teacher practice. So even though the kids are going to, quote, miss that instruction time, by setting aside Wednesday afternoon, if we have very effective professional development, the instruction time that they're going to get is going to be 10 times better because teacher practice will be better. So, so our principal and our dean of students, they have iPads. And so does our curriculum consultant. And I got one too. And so our walkthrough protocols are on the iPad. So that what we can do is we can print up the report each week that shows what the observations showed us. So when we meet, then we can go through what is happening with these observations, and the teachers can talk about this amongst themselves in a collaborative way. Because clearly some people have figured out a way, for example, to put their do-nows, and they do it much more effectively than other teachers. But the only way, it seems to me, you can improve practice is to have time so that teachers can actually talk with each other with additional help, like what you're mentioning. But without that collaboration, I don't know how teachers get better. Honestly, and so if the Denver Public Schools or anybody else thinks that you can just do this without giving teachers time each and every week, I mean on a regular basis to improve their practice, I don't know how it gets done.
And you also, it sounds like you have built in there some way of monitoring what goes on when the teachers go back to the room. And are they doing the do-nows? Are they doing a better job of having a classroom discussion?
I mean, it seems to me if a school decides these are our protocols, what good is it if you never give the teachers any feedback? It exists, but you never look at it. They never hear about it. Why then would you even have it?
Now, is it possible to imagine a school district doing what Howard is talking about? After all, in many other countries, a teacher may only have 3 classes. But in this country, in most districts I'm familiar with, a teacher has 5 preparations, sometimes 6. I mean, where do you... I mean, you got to hit somebody over the head with a hammer to get them to say, wait a minute, 6 classes a day is crowd control. That's not teaching. How do you change the mindset, I mean, of the folks in power?
Well, I do have...
I usually call Paul.
Yeah.
call Paul Hill.
I think it should also be part of the culture of the school for the kids to know what's happening on Wednesdays. To the extent, now, some professional development isn't like used on Thursday in a way that's transparent to the kids. But some professional development on Wednesday can really be about what we as a group are learning. And my philosophy is the more you make transparent to the students, and by the way, to their parents who want to know what the heck is happening on.
Well, how is the public going to respond? You say, well, we're doing professional development. Your kids are on their own every Wednesday afternoon. Are they just going to, how do you educate the public that this is essential?
Can I say, I don't think you have to say that.
Well, I mean, we're working hard for our student teachers in the schools to be more co-teachers so that it's not wasted on Wednesday. So there's a specific plan about what things and for what the kids and the student teachers will be accountable for at the end of that time. But I do think you have to persuade parents who are the most nervous about this. But the more you engage the kids so that they understand what kinds of things about the curriculum are being tested on those Wednesdays, brought back, here's how we're going to do it subsequently. Here was the problem of the week that this many kids in the school or in the grade level were stumped on. Those kinds of things make it part of the discourse in the school to think this way about improving our learning together.
Now I wonder if the audience voted so overwhelmingly in favor of principal teacher training and support, if some of them were thinking, well, that would be the easiest thing to do. It sounds as if it's going to be incredibly difficult to do it.
To do it right.
To do it right. Were you surprised that the low vote, only 2% said they wanted to talk about performance-based pay? I mean, that's all the 30 plus states now have some legislative provision for
They've talked
evaluating.
it to death in Denver. They've talked it to death.
They just have talked it to death. Okay, so of course Denver took the lead. Yeah, but so that you're not surprised that they didn't want to talk about it here. But can we talk about the second, improved teacher-principal evaluation? You talk about training, you talk about support. Who's doing well when it comes to, who's doing a better job of evaluating teachers and principals? I'm familiar with Washington, D.C., where Michelle Rhee imposed a system called Impact, which is teachers are evaluated 5 times a year, and if they it's on a grade of 1 to 4, and if they get a 1, they're gone. If they get a 2, they have a few months to get better, and then they might be gone. But talk about your perspective on improving teacher and principal evaluation. Paul, you've been...
So, let me start by saying I'm very skeptical about the DC approach. I've seen some good results from the kind of peer coaching that's done with teachers, but the problem is you can either strengthen the school as an organization or you can weaken it. And my guess is that this weakens it, that if the evaluation is done by the district, it's not about is this person pulling their weight inside the school? Are we having a weakness in our student growth in the area this person is responsible for? Or are we doing really well? And I think that's the question that needs to be asked about a teacher. And that question certainly can be partly helped by data, but the colleagues and the principal in the school are the ones who probably know more about productivity than anybody else. And I'm afraid that these centralized approaches we're taking are weakening that function.
They are all the rage.
I know they're the rage. Yeah. And I'm very much in favor of having the data available, but that doesn't mean you have to instrument all your decisions according to the data.
What is your thought about how do you improve teacher and principal evaluation, Howard? Who's doing it well?
I have no idea.
Is anybody doing it well? Lorrie?
Well, I think there's some good observational measures that are beginning to be evaluated as to their credibility. I think Denver patterned a lot of its work after the Charlotte Danielson rubric. I think that's a useful one. I think North Carolina has tried some of that, but I do not know the outcome data of them having evaluated. And of course, the Gates study is going to tell us a lot more about which measures are more credible, though my one critique of the Gates study is that they take as given which of these observational indices best predicts test score gains, or the value-added version of test score gains. And I think that's inappropriate. I would refer you to a study that Heather Hill at Harvard did, 2007, 2009, one of those years, where she actually looked at the scatter plot of qualitative observational measures and outcome scores, and looked at the ones that didn't line up. So the ones that looked very high on test score gains, but very low on the observational measures, when they went into those classrooms repeatedly, found, in that case, 2 instructors who actually didn't know the math that should have been delivered in that middle school classroom. One teacher confused the cost per box of cereal with the number of boxes that you could buy for $1. So, and what that instance was about was what we know in general, which is in that district there was still a correlation between socioeconomic level and value-added scores. So we're mistaking the test score gains that the students were able to make to the teacher. That's a mistake. So long story, to say we need to find out a lot more about both the observational measures and the test score gains.
So you're saying nobody really knows how to do it?
Oh, I think people are doing credible measures, and I've even volunteered, and we are using observational measures, and I've said we're working on the data systems in Colorado right now. Deanna's here too. We've said that we will judge our teacher preparation programs on the Colorado Growth Model scores before individual teachers should be, because we're an aggregate of teachers. And everybody knows that these statistical models are better in aggregate than they are teacher by teacher by teacher. And so I'm just raising a flag that people are jumping into this. It's going to be productive. We're going to learn a lot, but we don't have all the answers yet.
Well, the old way was, I was a high school teacher. The principal come sit in the back of the room, make a few notes, maybe come in once or twice a year. That's what we're trying to get rid of. The concern about the value-added or growth model or any kind of test data, you're saying it's okay to do it in the aggregate. Would you then evaluate, instead of evaluating a teacher or a principal, evaluate the entire school?
Yes, first. I think we should learn about the measures first. And that was actually a National Academy of Sciences panel recommended that you look at whole school evaluation and learn about your metrics before you start applying it to.
If you're willing to do that, do whole school evaluation, you got school A, B, C, and D, and E, and you see that things are going pretty well in schools A, B, and C, and not so well in D and E, do you then let school D and E do its own internal work? What happens next?
Well, we're not interested in school closing time.
Oh, okay.
but seriously.
But we're talking about training, support, and evaluation. If you evaluate on a school basis, what do you do then?
If you're talking from the district level, and you've got a school that's consistently low performing, then you have 2 options. One of them is to keep exhorting the people in that to do better, or to tinker with them by adding a few new people or whatever. And the other is by saying, we owe it to the children in that school to try for something better. And the advantage of that is that it, I think, helps motivate adult learning. One thing we haven't talked about, it isn't just a matter of pouring knowledge into the heads of teachers, it's getting teachers in a situation where they want to do better, they see they might be able to do better, they see collaboration and looking for new ideas as valuable, and if they don't do that, something bad might happen to them. But that's not a bad situation. It's just like adult learning in almost every other environment. And so I don't think you can totally divorce this function of professional development from the other functions of the district, which are also to say, here's an organization that looks pretty sick, let's see if we can get rid of it.
So, hypothetically, suppose you had a school district that color-coded its schools, green, orange,
Heard about that.
red.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
But to me, John, the problem I have always with these types of discussions is that we're starting with the assumption that the way these districts are constructed, they can actually do any of this. See, because, and so my thing is, I think the way districts are set up, the way they're financed, and the way they're governed, and the first time I ever thought about this, I read a book by this dude, and the book was called Reinventing Public Education. And from that moment on, and I was a superintendent when I read it, and I immediately came to the conclusion that as long as this district is organized the way it is, with this board, with the administrative structure set up the way it is, we're never going to make it.
So Denver's plan is not radical enough.
I'm just saying, and I know I'm breaking into the party and everything, but I know what I'm saying, that tomorrow nobody's going to radically change the Denver public school structure. So what we're going to be doing over the next number of years is trying to make something work that, in my opinion, is not capable of taking care of the task.
So this is good.
Yeah, and so we're all going to be in this situation of figuring out how to manage oppression. I don't mean that people are oppressed, but you know how it is, rather than fight a revolution, you figure out how to manage it so that people can survive within a terrible situation. Mm-hmm. And so what happens when you do that is we can all get incrementally better. But the structure that we have people in will not allow for us to get radically better because it's incapable of allowing that to happen.
That's probably why the first vote about the likelihood of dramatic gain was low. Almost everybody understands that at some level.
Right, so then we revert back to, we know we can't do it, but can we train the people?
Actually, I'd like to break in on that because here's something I thought about that first set of questions as a survey instrument designer. One of the questions, only one of the choices was out of reach, and it's out of reach by definition because the idea that everybody would be above average, I think it was choice B, and especially when we have a growth model that readjusts its baseline every year. So you can't, we could all be 50% above the old thing, but if you keep changing the standard every year and we still have to be in the top half, everyone should have said that was impossible. So I just want to know where the other 40% are. But if we set that reason for being against all of them, would the audience have been quite that pessimistic? Because the other goals were much more reasonably stated.
May I ask, Chris, would you put up slide 10? This was the second item that folks wanted to talk about. It was focusing on school performance. Slide, that. Slide.
This is the result, so what we want is the prompt.
No, I want the one that says, focus on school performance, close poor performing schools, open new schools. And now, that's what I'd like to see. Could I ask you to pick up your clickers again and which of these, I'm not going to abandon Howard, I want to come back to that, but I'm curious to know which of these you would recommend Denver focus its energy on. Improve the current schools that are low performing, close and create, advance the ones that are succeeding, all of the above, none of the above. How are we doing on voting here? These are strategies. Which of these would you...
This isn't the one I was disputing.
This is a different one.
It's the very first one of the, with the Denver plan.
Yeah, this is the first one in the Denver plan. I'm just curious to see which of these because with Denver's making some choices. I just want to know how you feel. Have we got folks voting?
Yeah.
All right, polls closing in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Sorry, you're saying. Oh, they were focusing on all of the above. Okay, well, I'm not sure that. Okay. Oh, I see. Oh, okay, that's the one I want. Sorry, my bad. That's the one I want you to vote on. There's a real a lot of conversation going on in the city, I understand, about how this focus, how this should play out. Polls closing 5, 4, 3, polls closed. So they say improve the schools that are low performing. Can I ask the three of you to reflect on, this is often called turnaround. You've seen this elsewhere. Does it work?
I hate to say this, but the data out there, the data out there on turnarounds is abysmal. Yeah. And our school, right, the school I chair the board of, is in a turnaround. And all I can tell you is it is excruciatingly difficult. And we have an environment where we can actually make quick decisions that we don't have to negotiate for 2 years. And by the time we get through, there's a new group of students in there. And even under the best of circumstances, turning around chronically failing schools is extremely difficult. And unless I've been misreading the limited research that's out there, this is proven to be very difficult to do. And so when the secretary said that we're going to turn around 5,000 failing schools in America, I was like,
what are you smoking? Yeah, and of course that is part of the legislation called No Child Left Behind, and a big part of the race to the top. And
I want to be clear, I am not saying it cannot be done. I'm just saying it is extremely difficult.
Are you surprised that folks voted, the majority voted for that?
No, because I think most people understand that you can't close down all the schools in America and create new ones.
Yeah. Paul? Lorrie?
Well, I think this audience is probably responding to the color-coded grid, which has a much higher proportion of schools potentially labeled as poor performing than the proportion that 5,000 represents in the entire nation. So we need to draw a distinction between in the lower half or lower third versus extreme. And furthermore, we shared offline, but I'll repeat for the audience. The very first thing you want to do when you have something that your metric tells you is a low-performing school is ask whether the metric is any good, or even the collection of indices, because the Colorado growth model is among the best of the statistical models claiming to level the playing field. But it is not necessary. It has not been tested so far for high proportions of second language learners or for disproportionate numbers of special education students. The very first thing that you would want to do is test for that. PPS already has in place another little test that you could do on the data is whether or not the school looks like it's making much better growth with the students who've been there for more than a year. That would be something that you would want to do, because if the school is making appropriate gains with the kids it's had in hand or in-house for the longer period of time, then there is talent in that school. There is commitment in that school, and what we're seeing with the statistical indicators is a artifact of high mobility. So all of that, I think, should be done before you give a red label to a school. Then you want to know whether or not it's really, really not savable, helpable. Will it be worth investing? Some of the things you do in the first year to invest in turning it around will tell you whether or not.
And what do you do?
So you actually start the process of turning around. You start some of the professional development in a non-watered down way. And if there's no sign of progress, then I am in favor of closing schools. But I don't think it's appropriate for that to be a quantitative indicator and 1, 2, 3 years, and then just the elapse of time.
But what do you say?
Sure.
What do you say to the Michelle Rees of the world who say, "Hey, wait a minute, we can't take 3 more years. We've been failing these kids. We need to change the people."
Well,
that's a popular.
Michelle Rees apparently is producing brilliant teachers in some county outside the U.S. And bringing them in. You have to know that you have better teachers ready and willing to work in that school and commit to long-term, not 1 or 2 years, long-term to this neighborhood. And I just think that conflating a genuinely bad teacher with an unfairly labeled bad teacher is harming the profession, and it's harming my ability to recruit teacher ed candidates because they are only hearing the negative. They're only hearing how disreputable this profession is, and even the people who are saying those kinds of things don't believe it's true of all teachers.
Paul?
John, I think this discussion has to be seen in light of the previous vote. People voted for all of the above, and I think that was a powerful vote. It said something important, which is that the district needs to have more than one arrow in its quiver. There are going to be some schools that are so bad that everybody gets a consensus they need to get the kids out of them. There are also going to be some potential schools, and maybe a charter that was willing to expand or double, that will be probably a lot better than some of the existing schools that are low performing. And you have to consider that question of what's the alternative. But it's likely that you're going to find a lot of schools, by crude or sophisticated measurement, either way, that you wish you could do better than, but you're not sure you can do better than with a new school because you haven't got a supplier, you don't know where you turn, you can't make it up out of nothing. So then you are forced to do the turnaround. And in some cases, as Lorrie suggested, there will be schools that aren't doing very well right now, but they seem to have the bit in their teeth, and you want to give them more time. The point is that the district is not following only one strategy, but its obligation is to try all these things. That my view of a school district is it's an organization that's supposed to see to it that the kids are educated. And that's not the same thing as an organization that consists of a given fixed number of schools and a given fixed number of teachers and a given fixed number of buses. Those are all balls and chains, if you will, that you have to deal with. But the district has to say, what actions can we take in this year that's likely to do the best for our kids in the short run and the long run? And that's probably going to involve a mixture of school closings and new openings and efforts to fix up, and certainly to support the schools that are doing well. Yeah. I mean, the last thing you ever want to do is neglect them. But that it is, I think that the vote that said do it all was a rational vote.
It also suggests the audience understands that there isn't some magic. If you just do this, everything will be fine. Incidentally, I worked for the NewsHour as a correspondent. We followed a school doing the turnaround, I think it was 3 years ago, for an entire year, a middle school in Richmond, Virginia. And you can see it on our website, and it is not a pretty picture, as Howard said. I mean, our website is learningmatters.tv, but it's a story of administrative duplicity and promises made and promises not kept. So, I mean, it's not just that it's hard work, it's also that some question of the sincerity of folks. I want to open this to questions, but I also want some advice for the Denver School Board, which may well be a slightly different school board after this coming election. I mean, Howard, you said that they're moving deck chairs. I mean, essentially, but they aren't going to just throw it out. So, what should they do?
You know what? I'm very reluctant to go anywhere and tell anybody anything about. I mean, I know we're supposed to be experts on this, but
you're older than I am.
Yeah, right, a lot older. And so, really, I'm going to say I really don't know what to tell people in Denver to do. I just think it's presumptuous, frankly. I don't know enough.
But they're here. They want to know. They have these forums. They have a plan. It's several years ago reapproved. They're trying to develop it. You can't just say.
Yeah, I can.
Or you can?
I just did. I mean, no, but I want to be clear on what I'm saying. What I'm trying to do is to say, like, I can listen to her because she has studied the Denver public schools, okay? And Paul, I've never studied the Denver public schools, and I just think it'd be a little bit intellectually dishonest for somebody to roll in here who really doesn't know anything in depth and start telling people, y'all need to do this. And I'm just reluctant to do that. Because first of all, it don't mean nothing because nobody's going to listen. But honestly though, I think there are people on this panel, I'm not one of them, who has more information about what is actually happening and could give more real advice than what I can.
But well, I want to push you though, then what would this revolutionary form of school, or the system of schools, what would it look like? What does it look like?
What it looks like is I would move entirely to a portfolio management entity. I would take the school board totally out of the business of running schools. And I got this all from Paul, so I got to tell what, and I'm distorting what he said to fit my own thing. But no, but literally, I do think this notion of every single school, in essence, being a charter, and that the board's responsibility becomes one of setting very clear standards and monitoring those standards and getting out of the day-to-day operation of schools. And to create an environment where different types of configurations could be created that are not geographic based. And it would allow for a lot more creativity. I would see unions moving to the point where they become almost like it was in the old days when craft unions would guarantee the quality of their craftspeople. And that would become the major role, for example, of unions. And the types of contractual relationships you would have would be what Kirshner talked about many, many years ago, a very, very small central contract, because the real contracts would be with these individual schools.
Incidentally, Randy Weingarten and John Wilson, the outgoing executive director of the NEA, agreed this spring at a public meeting to try to craft a model professional union contract that they said would be no more than 20 pages. And there were two labor secretaries in the room, both of whom, Ray Marshall and Bill Brock, one a Democrat, one a Republican, who agreed to work with them to try to do it. Now, this is supposed to be secret, but it ain't. I was there, and you know what reporters do. But in fact, this is working with Mark Tucker, trying to do that. I mean, union contracts in Finland and places are 12 pages. It's this sort of thing. So it may well be doable as a first step. Maybe someone knows how many pages the Denver contract is. So okay, yes. How long is it? 100 pages. It's with addendums in New York City. 38. Well, okay. Then in New York City, it's much longer with all the additions. Okay, we're doing advice.
Just quickly on the
yes,
contract, if I can. This is a little technical, but the real question about a labor contract is what's the bargaining unit?
Yeah.
If the bargaining unit is district-wide, then you get problems, very easily get problems of forced transfers of teachers into schools that don't want them and the like. And on the other hand, if you have the school as the bargaining unit, so the teachers there can collectively bargain and represent themselves as professionals, it's a whole different story. And Charles Kirshner's idea that Howard talked about is kind of a hybrid of an old model and a new model. It's like maybe the baseball players, where there's a set of standards set for baseball player employment, but the players they work for the teams, and so there's no overarching union that controls the whole league. And that's the analogy that Charles was trying to get to. But I wanted to just quickly say about my advice to Denver. I mean, I'm glad to give more detailed advice. I think a lot of things can be done more quickly. But my advice reflects what people in the country think. That Denver's a place that is trying hard to solve the problems it has and is using a lot of smart levers to do it. That involves new ways to attract teachers to Denver, new ways to reward teachers, new ways to bring in school providers and talented people from Denver and around the world to try to improve the stock of schools, new ways to support the schools that exist, new uses of data, And there's something wrong with every damn one of those, the way it's being done. But this is smart and it is humane. It's not an attack on teachers. It values teachers, but it also understands that the broader community has a responsibility to take action when kids aren't learning and not wait a long time.
And Denver has choice.
So I would say, if I understand that the caricature of what's at stake here is whether to continue what's been done to this point and continue to accelerate it, or to go back and try to get rid of all the chartering and the innovation schools and the like, and try to re-centralize the district. I think that's a disastrous stroke as compared to continuing what's been done.
Keep doing what you're doing, do it faster, do it better?
Do it better and listen to your friendly critics who have kicked you about it. Yeah.
Lorrie, advice for Denver?
So let me try to make mine, since I want to argue for coherence. Let me try to connect what I would like to recommend to what Paul is saying. So we have all of these mandates coming down, and I think it's impossible to just throw it all out and start over again. That's the revolution that isn't possible. But I do think that there are some chaotic things that are going on, and then there are coherent things that are going on. There's some tremendous high-quality instructional coaching that is possible, and it just evaporates. Partly because it is too thin, too little. So I would encourage Denver to do what it's doing. What it's putting into its LEAP system is a remarkable effort at trying to develop a thoughtful, conceptually framed, but then rigorous implementation that is involving teachers in doing that work. So that is credible. Some of the curricular investments are credible. But then too much is not getting better. Or we're getting better, but not getting better fast enough. I would encourage them to pick some scale where they can go deeper. So it would be better to continue to do things across the board, because you have to take care of everybody. But figure out which 10 schools, which 20 schools can you invest in with a purpose to learn from, to then deliver to 40 schools. Because right now, if everything gets watered down, the whole system is discredited. And so pulling things together and also making sure in at least some of the instance, all of the pieces are there to make it
But
work.
what about Howard's notion of essentially all charters, a system of schools, not a school system? Do you think that's a good direction for Denver to go?
No, I don't.
Why not?
Well, on average, charters haven't been found to be better than others. I wouldn't ever squelch a vigorous, lovely charter, but I don't think it's the remedy.
It's a delivery
charters-
system.
Well, a slightly different thing, the network that Howard talked about, because it has some of the coherent and coherent curricular instructional strategies, all of the pieces, because in that case, the network delivers that instead of the district. I don't think I would level the same criticism at that. But if you're just saying let 1,000 flowers bloom, that has not been he's not.
And I don't think he was, no.
If you're saying 1,000 flowers bloom, because you waste a lot of effort in all of the failures, because all of the parent energy, all of the school district's approval energy goes into allowing it to try something, and eventually, on average, those experiments have not been successful.
Denver has choice. Does Denver need more competition?
You should have said that Denver is doing something very important about choice, which is creating a common enrollment plan and choice plan to take care of some inequities that are caused by charter schools and to give parents the opportunity to have a pretty good chance of knowing what school their kid is going to get into. No one else has done that.
Well, yeah.
And this will have huge effects in the long run on creating a competitive environment in Denver, because people can, parents can really shop and decide what they want. I do think, on Lorrie's point, which I agree with a lot of, I don't think it's a good idea to try to create a new school to replace every school in Denver. That's nuts. It may be very valuable to create a charter-like status for every school in Denver that gives it more authority, more freedom, and puts it on a more performance contingent basis than it had before. That's not the same thing as going for all new. And what's interesting about that, in effect, that's where Rahm Emanuel is going in Chicago. They only have a certain number of charter schools, but all the schools will be on 5-year contracts, and they will more and more be able to choose their teachers, choose their times of opening, decide on class size,
bargaining at the school level.
But, I want to make sure everybody's clear. I'm a strong supporter of vouchers. I want everybody to understand that. And I don't want nobody to be like, oh, he didn't say nothing. Because I believe that you should not have an America where only people with money get to choose. And I believe that low-income and working-class people ought to have the ability, the power to choose. But I also believe that those of us like me who support choice also have a responsibility to talk about quality. Because the freedom to choose is an illusion if you only get to choose mediocrity. And I don't come at this from a free market competition, this and that. For me, this is about social justice. It's about who gets to choose in America and who doesn't.
Well, if Denver sets up a system of public school choice and a easy way for everyone to have a fair shot, does that satisfy?
No, because I think people with money, see, we all sit in these rooms and act like if you got money, that don't mean nothing in America. You know, and you got people who run this, oh, money's not important. The only people who ever say that got money. Nobody poor is rolling around in America talking about how cool it is to be out here with no money. And so my point is that if we're honest, you have to be clear that if you have money, you're going to do one of three things. You're going to move to a place where schools work. You're going to put your kids in private school, or you're going to find Kaplan or Sylvan or somebody, or you're going to do all three. The people who are forced to stay in places that do not work for them are low-income and working-class people who do not have the means.
So your solution would be a voucher?
Well, I just want to be clear that I think that for any strategy to work long-term, there's got to be an element of parent choice for poor and low-income people built into whatever that system is. And I didn't say nothing about this because y'all didn't ask me to come here to talk about that. But I just want to be clear that if I was restructuring it, that would be a critical element of whatever I would restructure.
Thank you. Are there some questions here? If so, stand up. Yes, let me hear you.
That's a low standard.
Yes, go ahead.
You know, I really think, in my opinion, Uncommon Schools has done some of the best work with data, you know, in terms of the use of data to improve schools. But I was recently down in New Orleans, and I do think people ought to look at New Orleans because on many days you get up, at least I'm going to speak for myself, I get up and say, we ought to blow the whole thing up. Well, that actually happened in New Orleans. And so what we need to be trying to figure out is how well are they doing reconstructing an entirely new system? What's working there, what's not working there, and why? Because there's some people who are in the recovery district that are not in a national network like KIPP or Uncommon Schools that are doing well. Because I wanted to say that Lorrie, so that she understands, I totally agree that not all charter schools are good. You have some very lousy charter schools. Just putting charter on a school don't make it a great school. And to me, charter schools is not the revolutionary thing. What's revolutionary is the chartering process,
And
not
if it,
charter schools.
the charter school is like restaurant, you know. You've got to go have a meal.
And so the direct answer to your question is, I think Uncommon Schools, from what I know and have experienced, has done a very good job with how it is that you use data. But I look at things like EdVision schools and look at their model of project-based schools, because there are people out here who actually like project-based schools. And I think both the Big Picture Company and EdVisions have some very interesting models of project-based schools, which work for some kids.
Just a quick comment about New Orleans. I've been filming down there since about 3 weeks after Katrina, and we're editing a documentary now about what really is in many ways a transformation. But it didn't start over. They didn't have a clean slate because the kids who came back probably were 3 years behind before the storm, and then they endured something that is unimaginable for most of us. We lost a parent, sibling, pet, house. We lost really traumatized kids. So what they've done there, and part of what they've done is they've worked like hell. I mean, before the storm, 26% of the kids were, and 8th graders were at basic, and now it's 59%. That's pretty remarkable, even if the test score measures are suspect. Is there another question or two? Yes, sir. I don't understand that question. You want to hold teachers accountable? Okay. Right. Is there a population that needs to be energized?
Sort of. I think I see two questions there. One of them is, how do you make people feel responsible for what they do? And I think that is actually something that's happened to a large degree in this country lately. I think we're improving. And I'm not sure I agree with Lorrie that teachers have been bashed, but only bashed. But it's true there's a combination of bashing and loving of teachers that's making teachers feel a little more insecure and worry a little bit more about how they're doing. I'm not so sure that's bad. But if you think about systems, if you build an accountability system that holds everybody accountable, it's kind of hard to figure out how to do that. Because everybody that's supposed to be working together has some different accountability, so they're looking to a different boss or a different measurement. I think the simplest approach to accountability in public education is to make schools the accountable units and have the consequences of success and failure in the schools affect teachers in the school, not because they necessarily deserve it, but because it's a natural consequence.
So the unit of evaluation is the school, not me as an English teacher, Lorrie as an art teacher.
So that it's like a small business. If you prosper together, you prosper together. If you don't, you don't. And if your small business or school doesn't prosper, doesn't do well, gets closed, is deserted by parents, whatever, individuals in the school who have teaching credentials and reputations and networks, they look for jobs elsewhere where that will work better. I think that's a far simpler approach to accountability than trying to lay out the metrics for every single participant in the system.
So then you also have to hold the system itself accountable for doing all it can to create the conditions that will enable the school to be successful, whether it's not interrupting with an intercom or not always calling the principal down to the central. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff, but who has to be energized? I mean, does the fact that only about 20, maybe 25% of households have school-aged children, is that an issue as you move forward for Denver or anywhere else? You got 80, 75% of families, households don't have kids.
You have only a fraction of the voters interested in the topic.
Yeah.
And Terry Moe's recent book shows what a high proportion of those voting for school boards in big cities are actually employees of school systems or related to them. So you have kind of a self-regulation or the lack thereof. I think it's important that school districts and school boards be held accountable, and some of that is done by the electoral process. But one thing that's occurring around the country is states are starting to say school districts are creatures of the state built for a particular purpose, and if a school district is continually neglecting a large number of its children, that school district needs to have the same scrutiny that a low-performing school does, and may be eliminated, or may lose control of its schools, or maybe have a competitor put in its midst. Yeah. That, I think, starts to put accountability at the level where nobody's really accountable.
Do you have a final thought? We're running out of time, but just a final thought before we go, when there is another forum coming on November 15th. Lorrie, a final thought?
To not answer the energized question, but to remind us that since I've spent all these years studying, teaching the test, and Paul is an economist and he knows the Campbell's law, that the more you try to quantize and measure, the more you better have self-checks built into your system so that you don't energize people in the wrong direction, so that you don't keep, because even if they veer off by 30%, the laudable claims, which is we want to be like Finland or we want to be like the highest performing countries in the, will be completely missed, especially since we do not seem to be able to get the assessments right. Worried that the new consortia are headed toward computer adaptive testing instead of, in quotes, next generation measures of the real learning that we want to ask of our students. And so if we don't get the outcome measures right, then the distortions are profound.
And Campbell's law, the more pressure you put on a measure, the more likely it is to be distorted and corrupted. And so, yeah. Final thought, Howard?
I just want to say that I hope we all leave here understanding how difficult this all is, and that we become a lot more humble about the work, that is ahead, and that there really is no one single solution that's going to make this all better, and our ability to figure out a series of things that could work. But at the end of the day, everything has to start with, how will this help kids?
I associate myself with Dr. Fuller's remarks. Just want to comment, no big city in this country has succeeded in educating successfully any more than a tiny fraction of its poor and minority students. And you can interpret this in a lot of ways. I choose to interpret it that we really don't know how to do this at scale. It's going to take some time and experimentation before we get there. The last thing we should do is go back to what I regard as the normal school district politics of the 60s and 70s, which is a succession of silver bullets brought in by superintendents, which are abandoned and get nowhere. Instead, you need to stay the course, looking at many options and understanding that a district is responsible to create performance any way it can.
It seems to me the ugly truth about education, public education, that no one likes to talk about is that there's really a one-to-one correlation between parental income and educational outcomes. But rather than give up on public education entirely, there are outliers. There are schools that are successful. And it seems to me that the only rational thing to do is go look at those schools. Sometimes they're networks that Howard mentioned, and see what they're doing and figure out ways to imitate. don't talk about replicate, go to scale. Just go copy what they're doing. Denver spends what, $8,500 per child, something like that, and spends about $100 assessing the kids. That's barely 1%. Now you spend more assessing your car with the annual tune-up than we're willing to spend. I mean, why any city, any place in the country would trust measures that are so cheap and use that as a way of assessing whether you're making progress. That said, I'm going to leave Denver just as impressed as I was coming in because of this commitment and this willingness to dig deep and challenge conventional wisdom. But I want to ask you all to give it up for this remarkable panel. Thank you all very much.